All right, guys, welcome back. We did our Coyote teardown. We had a friend of ours, and I got lots of friends with engines that all need work. So, quite a while ago, he spun a rod in this thing. It was a small block Ford, little 8.2 deck, 347 cubic inch, 30 over 4-inch bore. So 4030 bore on this, and he's been waiting to put it together. He had his friend go over the mains and everything because somebody put a girdle on it. He has a friend that runs a machine shop. I don't know if I'm supposed to disclose this or not, so I won't right now. But it looks to me like it's, your basic 347. It has an Eagle forged steel crank, which he had cut 10 and 10. I guess it wasn't terribly bad. You can tell it's been balanced because it's got some weld in it, everything like that. He has old SRP pistons. I measured the pistons. Man, this thing's gonna be a little bit loose. He's willing to run it. It's about 7.5 thou piston to wall clearance. I suggested having them coated. He's willing to run it. I told him, this isn't going to be a forever engine. This will be a short-term build, but that's, what he's willing to do. So it looks like he's got, typical Eagle H-beam rods with ARP 8740 bolts. So the rods aren't going to be the weak length. They don't look too bad. The weird part about these Eagle cranks and Eagle rods was they used an old GM oddball V6 bearing, and it looks like he bought some King bearings. He had mains for it. Same thing, King bearings, 10 and 10. He was a little worried about that because he didn't know. He bought some Speed Pro rings, 35 thou, so they're file fit. And he has not a bullet cam. This is a stage 2 trick flow cam or something like that. That'll be perfect. He's gonna run, I think he's got some Pro Comp heads that were gone over by Fox Lake, so they should be more than good enough. Typically you don't MIG weld these, but being as it's a steel crank, it will be fine. We might go in there and clean that up a little bit because there's some weld in there and some maybe loose fittings, and it's definitely dirty. So yeah, we're gonna measure that too. We'll go through, we'll measure everything. So far, it looks pretty good. Let's look at the block. It is a roller block. It's got for the spider and the dog bones. Not a huge fan of this. It looks like somebody had painted the bores, and looks like some of this paint's coming off. A lot of this paint's coming off. It was supposedly a hot tank, but man, I'm not a huge fan of that. It should have probably been blasted, but then they would have had to machine a deck. Somebody did deck this at one point. It's a little bit of a rough job, so we'll probably stone it to clean it up. Not that it's going to be a problem, but I don't like that paint like that. You can end up having it where you don't want it. Let's see. It is missing a couple of the thread-in plugs. They did, looks like Permatex Aviation sealed. I just heard some stuff coming out. It is clearance already, so it looks like ARP main bolts. Probably a no-name cat or something girdle. They did clearance some. The clearance job actually looks pretty good. They did put in cam bearings. Those look good. They did stake the plugs, which is nice. I prefer thread-in, but staked in will work. The block isn't terribly bad. It's missing some guide pins. They definitely did line hone it. So, all in all, it is a one-piece remain, as all roller blocks are. Definitely didn't clean it real well, though. Yeah. We'll make sure it's good to go. Like I said, I was gonna hone this block a little bit to get a nicer crosshatch. They did not hone it for whatever reason, but it's so loose already that I'm a little anxious about it, and I don't think I'm gonna, because it's just already so loose. We'll see what the pattern looks like after I do some cleaning. So WD-40 isn't the greatest rust preventative, but it definitely makes a pretty decent cleaner. I use it to clean all my tools at work. It cleans up the diesel grime and everything like that, and loosens some stuff you didn't really think would be loose, so I like it for that. We'll see what it brings up out of the paint and everything like that. I just don't, this kid has had the worst luck with engines. I don't know what all he has going on, but he's had big name builders build them and pretty well-known builders build them, and he seems to always have one problem or another. So we're gonna try and kind of reset that record for him. I don't know if it's something we can do or not, but we'll try and do our best to make sure that this is, you know, this is something we can kind of keep together for him for at least a little while. I mean, like I said, it's so strange the amount of problems he's had, and he's telling me about them, and I'm like, man, I kind of almost don't want involved. But I've built quite a few of these little 8.2 deck guys and never really had any issues with them. So hopefully we can kind of continue that trend and maybe get this guy out of his funk. Yeah, look at that. So it was clean, but this is another reason. Like I said, WD-40 will loosen up stuff that you just didn't even know was grease and oil and stuff like that. So transmission fluid kind of does the same thing. There's a lot of detergent in it, and it'll loosen it up. But, you know, just be aware. I like to clean out all the threaded holes and look down and everything like that. So that's where we're going to start with this one. We'll go through, we'll assemble our rods on our pistons, put the spiral locks in, because we all know everybody loves those. We'll set all that up, and then we'll get started. He's got to get me the oil support rails. So when you have some of these early 347s, the wrist pin intersects the oil ring, so they have to put a support rail right there. And one thing to note on them, there is a little, some of them have a little bump that sticks out that indexes them, so you never end up with them hanging over the wrist pin. But, you know, there's a whole big argument, 331 versus 347. I've never had either issues with either. Neither one end up lasting 1,000,000 miles because of the places they're used, but it's just something to watch out for. There are different versions of it now that use a different length rod, so you don't run into those issues. But this is an old kit. Like I said, the oddball GM bearings are hard to find, everything like that. So we're gonna have to see where we end up with clearances on this, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, I'll bring you back when I start assembling it, and kind of go from there. All right, guys, I got a couple questions on my last video about file fitting rings and how I do it. So what I do is I put the rings in the bore, I check, okay, they need filed. How much do they need filed? Roughly, you can take a guess on that. So with the first one, I go maybe 10, 15 turns on the ring grinder, check, 10, 15 turns, check, check, check. And then from there, you know, I can take it and I'll do half as many turns to the total and then check. So that's how I do it. You always want to file inward so you're not breaking it, the edges, and then afterwards you want to deburr them. So this is our second ring. So I know that roughly it's been taking 40-ish turns for each one. So what I'll do is I'll go over here. I'll start out, you know, line up the gaps. You want to keep it square. You only want to file one side of the ring typically. Some people will do both, some people will do one side, but you want to keep it square and everything like that. So that's how I do it. These cheaper tools, they're not scientific. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So I'll take 25. Like I said, I know it's been taking 40, but I'll take 25. I like to squeeze the rings together so you're not scraping them, and then put them in. And then you take your piston. Some people will have a ring squaring tool. I never had one. I never found it necessary. And I just make sure the edges are all even. Take my piston out, take my feeler blade. This one's marked between 24 and 26 thou. See, okay, it doesn't quite fit. And I want 26 to 28 thou on this, so it doesn't quite fit. So we're gonna take another 10. And a lot of this is controlled by your pressure and how much you actually squeeze the ring, or how much force you're putting in, or how you're guiding it. Once again, this isn't how you have to do it, this is how I do it. I've had great results over hundreds of engines built. So it fits into 24 and just barely fits the 26. So that's where we want to be. That's all it was. Like I said, there's nothing to it. There's no major science behind it. This is just a cheapy Summit Racing ring grinder that I've had for years. But once you're done, you do want to deburr these. You want to take a small file, chainsaw file, nail file, whatever, knock and dress the high edges down. That's all you want to do, because if not, they leave those marks in the bore that everyone always posts questions about on every engine building place I've seen. They never, you also don't want them digging into the ring lands and the pistons. You want the rings to rotate smoothly and freely. Another thing to watch out for is on these, a lot of stroker engines where the wrist pin actually kind of intersects the bottom oil ring, there will be like a 30 thou spacer ring that goes in here. Some will have a locating tab. He was actually missing these, so he ordered them, but that's what supports it. That's one of the reasons people say, oh, strokers burn oil, blah, blah, blah. I've never had that experience. I don't know, maybe they were built way loose, or maybe the wrong rings were used, or maybe the gaps were wrong, or something. But I mean, will they tend to consume a little more motor? Yeah, if you build a loose motor for boost, sometimes they'll use a little bit of oil, but you're not going to be losing a ton of oil everywhere. I mean, I have a new 6.6 Chevy service truck, the gasser, and that thing burns, I think GM allows something like 2 quarts per 100 gallon of fuel. Well, that truck gets 10 mile per gallon. So I'm always putting oil in it, as long as with the other guys I work with. These, you know, I don't think you'll ever see that level of consumption on these. You know, that may be due to the way GM set up the PCV system in that, maybe, or light tension rings or light oiled. I've never tore apart a 6.6 to see, but on these old 347s, I just generally don't have oil burning issues on them. Now, do I have any with 1 million miles? No, but I got some that had 40, 60,000 on them over the years, and guys really, you know, we tear them down for a refresh and they still look and act okay. So that's one of our cases. Like I said, I went through, and what I like to do is I always number them. Here's another thing. So a lot of aftermarket rods will have a chamfer cut in them. I hope you guys can see that. Some will have them on both sides, some will only have one. Well, the chamfer is always going to face the side of the crank where they cut a fillet. If you can see here, it's this crank has a little fillet, a radius cut in it, and that's to help strengthen the crank and everything. So you'll notice when you're doing this that has to face there. If you face it here, you won't have any rod to rod, side to side clearance, and it'll want to jam up. That's another one I see. But you'll also notice that a lot of the times these bearings will be narrowed to actually clear that. So they'll offset the tang to space the bearing in. They used to have cut bearings that, you know, were beveled to clear the crank edge, but they stopped doing that and just started figuring out that making them narrower and offsetting them was cheaper, easier, and required less machining. So that's something to watch out for too. Some rods will have, you know, some rod bearings will be labeled top or bottom. Some will have a hole in them to you squirt oil out of them, but that's just a couple things to watch out for. Like I said, every engine's different, but you know, simple steps will make your life easier and your engine dependable and not have any issues. We're going to start assembling our rods to our pistons, and I like to also mark the edges so I know, you know, when I'm putting them together, it's a quick, okay, forward, 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 everything. On these aftermarket rods, sometimes the wrist pins will need honed a little bit because sometimes they're a little bit tight. These ones have been already worked, so that's not an issue for me. He also has a roller thrust bearing for the cam and stuff like that. So we'll bring you guys back when I start assembling stuff. Watching a guy put together spiral locks is far less entertaining, I'm sure, but see you in a bit.